Well, we're all concerned about the economy. Where is it? Where is it going? And of course, now with the budget tug-of-wars going on in Capitol Hill, boy, there's much to be said about that. But I am really honored to have with us today Hunter Lewis. He is the, well, first of all, he contributes to Forbes magazine. He's co-founder of the global investment firm Cambridge Associates. And he's authored a couple of books that are fascinating. Free Prices Now, Fixing the Economy by Abolishing the Fed. Okay. And the other one is Crony Capitalism in America. And we want to talk to him about all of these issues. Hunter, nice to have you. Where are you, my friend?
Good to be with you. I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia.
All right, nice to have you. Well, we've been speculating that there's going to be a change at the Guard coming up in January, but let's talk about the current Fed chair, Bernanke. What's your thoughts on him?
Well, he's been an unmitigated disaster. He's been even worse than Alan Greenspan. The prior Fed chairman, Paul Volcker, was really quite a success. He got the economy in pretty good shape, and the last two have made a complete mess.
Now these are Bush appointees, and so how do you justify? What would you say about them being somewhat appointed by Bush?
Well, Ronald Reagan appointed Alan Greenspan. That was the biggest mistake he made. And George Bush, of course, appointed Bernanke, and then Obama reappointed him. And that really illustrates that the economic problem we're having is not just from one party. It's a bipartisan problem. Both parties are involved in it, both the bad economic policies and the crony capitalism.
All right. So Bernanke, was he touted as a conservative?
Well, that's an interesting point. I wrote an article for Forbes when he was first appointed, asking the question, is Ben Bernanke a conservative? And then answering no. But you see, it wasn't so clear at that moment because you had to read between the lines to figure out what his beliefs were.
Well, it's been so interesting as we watch these folks perform in that. You're not the only one that has come out with some sharp criticism on. I know I've had a lot of money manager people on said that this guy single-handedly has ruined the economy.
Well, that's right. I mean, we've had a recovery for some rich people, but we haven't had a recovery for the average person or the middle class or especially poor people. And that's not the way it's supposed to be working.
So how do we as citizens put a check on these people? They seem to be so powerful and unchecked.
Well, first of all, people have to understand that the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, in many respects, has more control over the economy than the president does. The general level of awareness is very poor here. The people don't know much about the Fed. They don't know what's going on. There were other periods in American history when the voters were very focused on monetary policy. We had a cross of gold speech, in the 19th century and so on. That was just part of politics. But today, people are kind of asleep, and they need to wake up.
All right, so back to Greenspan and Bernanke. It would seem to me that why wouldn't the president or their administration vet these guys a little bit more? Because they seem to be the dream chairmen for the left.
Right, and George Bush, I know that there was at least one voice in the White House that was raising questions about Bernanke. But I think George Bush felt that he knew Bernanke and that he was kind of his guy, that he could trust him. And he didn't, he should have paid more attention because he could have gotten out of office without that crash if he had appointed a different Fed chair.
Well, the first heads up I felt on this, Hunter, was when Obama reappointed him. I thought, uh-oh, there's something about this guy I didn't get either.
Well, when Bernanke was first named, by Bush, Senator Schumer and Kerry and the most liberal Democrats immediately applauded it and said it was a great appointment.
All right. So can you point to any single thing that you felt was a disaster in some of his decisions?
In general, the Federal Reserve has just been printing way too much money. They've been operating on the theory that if you have a problem caused by too much debt, you can solve it by adding more debt, which of course defies common sense. And actually by adding debt, you can reduce the debt. It all totally defies common sense and has led them to print way too much money, over the last 20 years. And all of that money just leads to bubbles, and then it leads to bust. And it also leads to crony capitalism, the corruption of our economy.
All right, I want to kind of get into that because I never could figure out why Bernanke or even Greenspan would make certain moves and it would reflect positively on Wall Street when in fact we're piling up debt. So that only has to lead towards your latest book, or the book earlier, I should say, Crony Capitalism. What's the connection?
Well, you have to understand how it works. When the Washington, bails out Wall Street, of course, there's a conveyor belt of money going to Wall Street. And Wall Street is in a position to either make money from that money, they take a cut on it, or they speculate with it. So they do very well. And at the same time, it's not just a bailout of Washington, it's also at the same moment a bailout of Washington. Because Wall Street then turns around and buys government bonds, and then the Federal Reserve buys those bonds back with its newly printed money. So in effect, Washington is able to sell bonds to itself by sending it via Wall Street. This is all, bad stuff, and people just don't understand what's happening.
No, I don't think the average person does. And so how critical are we to some kind of a breakdown?
It's always hard to know when the breakdown will occur, but when you're blowing up these bubbles, it's just a matter of time before the bubble will burst. The Fed.
Okay, sorry about that. We'll get reconnected. We're talking to Hunter Lewis. He is a contributor to Forbes magazine. He's also the co-founder of global investment firm Cambridge Associates. And 2 books, you may want to check them out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon. Free Prices Now, which is the fixing the economy by abolishing the Fed. And when we get him reconnected, we'll talk to him about that. And the book that kind of put him on the map was Crony Capitalism. And as you know, the current Fed chair, Ben Bernanke, will be retiring at the end of this year. And there's great speculation now as to who's going to replace him as the Fed chair, which in itself is a big issue because the person's name that keeps popping up is Yemen. And we don't know a whole lot about her, other than she is an economic professor. Former economic professor, I should say, from the University of California at Berkeley, and currently works with a fairly large bank, and I'm sorry I don't have the name of that right here, but another potential liberal going into that seat, which could really make things very, very interesting. And all of that now is starting to pop up as the president pretty much has said she's going to be the appointee. So let me take a break. We'll try to get reconnected with Hunter as soon as we can to finish our conversation. Again, his books, there's 2 of them, and the one that we want to get into when we get him back is Free Prices Now, the fixing the economy by abolishing the Fed. I wonder if that can be done. I know a lot of you economic advisors and financial advisors like to see that happen. And the other book that received great criticism, but yet turned a lot of heads, Crony Capitalism in America, 2008 to 2012. All right, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and we got reconnected. Sorry about that. Hunter Lewis is with us today, and he's authored a couple of books. Free Prices Now, Fixing the Economy by Abolishing the Fed. I want to ask him if that can be done. And his first book, Crony Capitalism. Sorry about that, Hunter, but I want to come back to Bernanke just for a moment. Do you think his policies will survive his departure?
I wish they wouldn't, but at the moment, the signs are pretty clear that they will.
Is this
the leading candidate to succeed him, Janet Yellen, is even more likely to print money than he has been.
Give us a little background of her. I mean, I do know that she was a professor at Berkeley, and then she went on to be into the banking world. Give us a little background on her.
Well, she hasn't really had banking experience. She's an academic, and some people jokingly say that today our monetary system is the PhD standard, instead of the gold standard or something else. And that's about right. I mean, we have these academics who are running things, and they're running them based on theories. And the theory they're using at the moment has very little factual support or logic behind it. Wow.
All right, back to Bernanke just for a moment. Now, is the Fed held to laws or statutes? Maybe you can explain that. I mean, what does that chairman abide by? And has Bernanke violated any of that?
I mean, this is another really worrying situation because, of course, the Fed was set up 100 years ago. It's the 100th anniversary. There was a law establishing it, and the law has changed over the years. And certainly much of what they did in 2008 and 2009 was legal, but some of what they did was illegal. And then the question is, how can you challenge when they're engaging in illegal behavior? It's very difficult. The Supreme Court recently ruled that even a bank, which is regulated by the Fed, cannot sue the Fed over this kind of activity unless the bank can show that it's been harmed financially. So nobody has standing to sue the Fed.
All right. Now, you have suggested, and so have a lot of other people, abolishing the Fed. Could that actually happen?
Well, certainly isn't likely right now, but we have to remember that for most of American history, we didn't have a Fed. So there's no question that the system does not need a Fed. And in terms of the possibilities for the future, change can come very unexpectedly and dramatically. If the system breaks down, there will be change, and there can be dramatic change. I mean, nobody ever imagined that currencies around the world would float, as they say, would be just traded in the markets from day to day. That was unimaginable, and yet suddenly in the 1970s it happened.
All right, so Yellen comes in. I mean, apparently now she is the heir apparent as other people pull themselves out of nomination consideration. And I think the president's all but named her at the moment. And if she comes in, she starts printing money. In your opinion, Hunter, what will that do to us?
Well, what I'm afraid of is that she'll print even more money than Ben Bernanke has. That will blow up bubbles even bigger. And the bigger the bubble, the bigger the crash that follows. So, it'll just be more damage, especially to the middle class and the poor. And they can't afford that. I mean, the middle class has real income has declined more since the end of the recession than during the recession. The average real income of Americans is no more than it was 23 years ago.
Well, as you know, we got the big battle going on the Hill as we speak, and the House now has passed the budget that does not including Obamacare, and that's going to be the political hot potato of the week as we head towards October 1st. And there's always this threat of a shutdown. Isn't a shutdown better than a breakdown?
Well, because I'm not opposed to a shutdown, but the problem with a shutdown is that the president will then decide what is funded and what is not funded. And of course, we went through this with Clinton, and he just deliberately chose all the areas that would annoy people the most. So he closed the passport office, and he shut down the people that work when you come in and out of the country, all these kinds of things, just to make the pain as intense as possible. So a government shutdown could be done, but it would have to be done with a different president.
All right, but what if now the pressure for the Republicans to give in on funding Obamacare is pretty intense because they're obviously going to get tagged with shutting the government down. All numbers point towards Obamacare really being the breaking point. Would you agree with that?
Well, Obamacare has damaged the economy a great deal. And of course, as you read, it's leading to people getting part-time jobs instead of full-time jobs.
Right.
I mean, Obamacare added $2 to $5 in effect to the minimum wage, so that it really has hit hardest the people at the bottom of the ladder. I mean, the people with the lowest wages now, the cost to a business to hire them has gone up so much that many of them, of course, are being laid off. It just follows that and also many young people are not being hired. And I especially worry about young people because they come out of school, with this tremendous burden of debt. That burden of debt, which has been created by the government, because the government has subsidized the student loans, and that money has gone to the colleges and just resulted in higher tuition and fees. So the kids have all of that, then they get unemployment. Then there are new overtime rules that make it even harder to hire them. I mean, everything that's being done is really working against them.
All right. I think the average American understands we're spending more than we're taking in. They want to raise the debt ceiling. We can't afford Obamacare. It's been given a bunch of opt-outs for various groups and companies and even Congress itself. And we got this incredible debt hanging over the top of us. Is there any way out of this mess, Hunter, in your opinion?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have to change the economic policies, and we have to stop this growing corruption of crony capitalism, which is just the other side of the coin of the bad economic policies, because the bad economic policies are helping people who have connections to the government, who can have first use of all this money that's being printed. I mean, people are getting very, very rich. At the same time, the country is doing so badly. All you have to do is reverse those policies. That will reverse the drift toward more and more cronyism, and that will put the economy right again. Of course, it won't be painless, but the way we're going to end up with the most pain of all.
All right, so explain crony capitalism from your perspective. We hear this a lot. I think I understand it to a certain degree, but some people would write you off as a conspiracy wacko. So explain it from your perspective.
You know, I don't think that most people would say that crony capitalism is a conspiracy theory. I mean, I think they see it themselves.
Right.
But what is it? I mean, it's the alliance of big government with big business, big finance, big labor, big law. I mean, all of these bigs get together and they make deals that work well for themselves, but not for the public, and not for the middle class, and not for the poor. Just to give you one example, at the beginning of this year, we had the fiscal cliff bill, and President Obama succeeded in raising taxes on some of the rich through that bill, but he stuck in a provision in that bill lowering taxes on his favored corporations. And the tax reductions on those favored corporations completely offset any additional tax revenue from the rich. And of course, that was done with sleight of hand, behind the scenes, and the media didn't even report on it.
All right, now we're starting to see a little bit of pushback, even with PERS and unions. We've seen some state battles. Do you think that pushback will continue?
Yes, because the system doesn't work. And in the long run, it doesn't even work for labor unions. So even though they've been such big supporters of the present system, I mean, even they in the long run are going to realize, hey, you know, these policies are just creating unemployment. You know, our own labor union members are being laid off. This will not work, or they don't have proper health care. The cost of health care is going up so much. Yeah, as I mentioned, you know, I mean, I was talking about young people and what's happening to them. Another element of Obamacare is that the cost of their health care, of course, is going way up.
Mm-hmm. You know, even in the state of Oregon, as we speak, we're going into special session next week. The governor's calling one day a special session, and basically to raise taxes, but on the other hand, supposedly to cut PERS for some public employees. But the last report we had in the state of Oregon, there's a 50-50 chance that our PERS system is going to hit the wall. This is Oregon, so we can't even afford what we're raising taxes on. It just seems to be crazy economics out there.
Well, you know, Franklin Roosevelt would not allow labor unions for public employees, and all Democrats, Republicans, they were all opposed to that. It came in under President Kennedy, and then of course what eventually happened is that you give more and more money to the public employee unions, and then they slice off some dues which are used to support the politicians who are giving the money to the union. So we have this increasingly corrupt system of, in effect, our tax money going to the public employee in theory, but really going to the public union, which then goes to the politicians. So the tax money is fueling, you know, this corrupt system.
Wow. And
it can't go on.
Hunter, you seem to be the lonely watchman on the wall yelling out. Do you have anybody behind you helping with this? I mean, is there anybody that's waking up and say, hey, this has got to stop?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think there are other people who are very aware of this. And there are people on Wall Street who are very aware of it and very opposed to it. I don't feel alone at all. I'm certainly not a majority yet. Yeah. But, you know, given time, people will understand this. And people have a lot of power. I mean, the average person, if they let their views known to Washington, they will be heard. The politicians are very sensitive to the calls they get and the mail they get and the emails they get. It only takes enough voters to get going, and things will change.
Well, we saw that with Syria, in the policy that the president was trying to impose on Syria. And as we saw that thing just totally unwind and become a bigger mess, but we didn't go in, we didn't do any military force. Now comes Obamacare, and I understand it's still huge numbers of defunding Obamacare, even if it means shutting down the government. Could that trigger some kind of a domino breakdown effect?
Well, I don't think that will happen. I mean, it's very unlikely. I mean, most likely, all of this will pass without defunding Obamacare. Senator Rand Paul, for example, just said the other day, we're not going to be able to defund Obamacare. We just don't have the power. That is, the Republicans in one house of Congress don't have the power to do it. So to some degree, this is theater, and it's not going to make that much difference. Meanwhile, the appointment of the new chairman of the Federal Reserve is going to make an enormous difference. And yet the average person isn't even aware of that.
All right. So you think Yellen's going to be the person?
It looks very likely.
And again, just repeating, where do you think that's going to go? What do you think she brings to this position on the shirt tail of Bernanke?
Well, I mean, she guarantees that we will have a continuation of the present policies, and if anything, more of them. So, we had a situation where Ben Bernanke said he might just taper, he might just slightly reduce the level of printing money and just buying the government selling debt to itself. And that shook the markets. That was in June, and it shook world markets. And then they completely backed off and didn't even do that.
All right, so what will this do to the value of the dollar if we continue to print more money?
The dollar is likely, the reason the dollar goes up, even though we do all these irresponsible things, is that other governments are often doing even more irresponsible things. There's a race to the bottom among world governments. Just as you have crony capitalism all around the world, you also have a competition in who can depreciate their currency faster so that they can sell more goods. And this is not a good thing. This is like the 1930s. You had a race to protectionism. Everybody was trying to put up tariff barriers all around the world, and it contributed to the Great Depression. So we have something analogous going on right now. Everybody's trying to get their currency value down. And so even as bad as what we're doing, our dollar tends to go up.
Well, it's interesting you say that. That was where I wanted to go next, that the whole world seems to be playing this incredible game. And because someone would say, well, China, all China has to do is call for the note and we're in trouble. Well, we could give them California. Oh, we can't pay the debt, but here you can have California. I mean, we can never repay that debt.
Well, but one thing to keep in mind, which the average person does not understand, is that the Federal Reserve owns more of the government's debt than China or Japan do. So in other words, we think of, China's our biggest creditor. Well, no, the government's the biggest creditor of itself through the sleight of hand. Wow.
Well, Hunter, you're quite the resource. Where can people get copies of your books?
Against cronycapitalism.org is the website.
Okay.
And of course at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or other bookstores.
All right. So what's your next article coming out? What are you writing on?
I haven't really decided yet, but I just made a couple posts to that against cronycapitalism.org about the Federal Reserve. Warren Buffett just made some admiring comments about the Federal Reserve, so I tried to explain what it all really meant.
By the way, he did a reversal on Obamacare. He backed away from it.
I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, apparently last week he said it's not good now. And here he is. He voted for the president, supported Obamacare. Now he says, no, it's a disaster. We need to get rid of it.
Well, he said how nice it is that the Federal Reserve is contributing some money to the federal budget. But I showed how that's all baloney.
All right. Thank you, my friend. Again, cronycapitalism.com. Is that right?
Against cronycapitalism.org.
Oh, against cronycapitalism.org. All right. Thanks, Hunter. And keep up the good work. We'll have you back someday.
Thank you.
Okay. And again, you want to check out his books. And his first one is, well, the one that's recent, Free Prices Now, Fixing the Economy by Abolishing the Fed. And there is a picture there on the screen for those watching on the TV. And Crony Capitalism in America, you may want to check that one out as well. Check it out at Barnes & Noble. And or online at Amazon, or you can go to againstcronycapitalism.org and order it through there. All right, we'll see you next time on Focus Today.